How real is the most intriguing on-screen supervillain, Dr. Lecter? What parallels with other hugely popular TV series can be found in Hannibal? And in what way was the BBC series Sherlock inspired by the infamous cannibal? Hi, my name's Dylan. Hannibal is coming back to our screens, so let's dive into the dark world of the most charming serial killer. The unlikely pop culture phenomenon. The Silence of the Lambs novel, written by Thomas Harris, wasn't the first book featuring the charismatic villain, but it became a huge publishing success. And its film adaptation added even more to the popularity of such a controversial character as Hannibal Lecter. Since then, it was nearly impossible to read the novels without hearing Anthony Hopkins' voice, and none of us can ever think about fava beans the same way ever again. Amazingly, in The Silence of the Lambs, the cannibalistic killer appeared on screen for only 16 minutes in total. But Hopkins' performance was so brilliant that his monstrous character dominated the film. And it was definitely enough to create a classic image of the dreadful Dr. Lecter, a mixture of brains and madness that's both revolting and oddly appealing. Years later, the actor still seems to be overwhelmed by Hannibal's ascension to cultural phenomenon. I had a hunch that it would catch on, but I had no idea that it would take off in this way. Anthony Hopkins was so insanely perfect for this role that many were unsure if Mads Mikkelsen would live up to him in Brian Fuller's TV adaptation. But Mikkelsen has done it! And his duo with Hugh Dancy has proved to be even more compelling to the audience than that of Hopkins with both Edward Norton and Jodie Foster. By the way, the complex and intriguing relationship of Hannibal with his counterpart from the FBI bears a lot of similarities with other popular on-screen couples, but we'll talk about that a bit later. The real Hannibal Lecter. In an interview last year, the creator of the infamous cannibalistic killer, Thomas Harris, insisted that he didn't invent anything. Nothing's made up. You don't have to make anything up in this world. And the shocking truth is that Hannibal Lecter, as well as other serial killers that appear in his universe, are all based on real-life cases. For example, Buffalo Bill from The Silence of the Lambs is based on a necrophile and serial murderer Ed Gein, and the Tooth Fairy from the novel Red Dragon is based on the BTK killer. However, Thomas Harris didn't reveal where he got the inspiration from Hannibal until the 25th anniversary edition of The Silence of the Lambs was released. In the updated introduction to the book, the writer finally explained that this creepy character was based, at least in part, on an actual doctor, whose name is Alfredo Bali Trevino. Harris met him while visiting a prison in Mexico in the 1960s, when he was a 23-year-old reporter. Trevino was sentenced to death for a crime of passion. He murdered and then chopped up his gay lover. But in 2000, after 20 years in prison, the doctor's sentence was commuted and he was released. Remarkably, Trevino continued his medical practice, providing medical care to the poor until he died 9 years later. Harris later said that when he needed a character with a peculiar understanding of the criminal mind, he remembered the convicted doctor, who had a certain elegance about him. The other source of inspiration was the Monster of Florence, which was an actual case in Italy in the 1960s. Although the crimes of Il Mostro were way less poetic than they were portrayed in the Hannibal series. Now, let's get back to the show and the curious parallels its characters have with other TV personalities. Hannibal references in Killing Eve. I just can't help noticing a lot of similarities between the relationship of Hannibal Lecter and Will Graham and those of Eve Polastri and Villanelle. Just like Hannibal, Killing Eve is a battle between outstanding personalities. And, what's more important, both shows tell a story about two people on opposite sides of the law who gradually become fascinated with each other. Eve differs from Will Graham because she doesn't have his superb profiling abilities. But she shares his obsession with work, and somehow finds violence enigmatic and compelling. Obviously, Villanelle is not too similar to Lecter. She's not a high-profile psychiatrist, and the reasons she kills are very different to Hannibal's. However, she shares his love for the finer things in life, which in her case are designer clothes for the most part. Also, she's extremely inventive, and her killing methods can sometimes be compared with Lecter's approach and treatment towards his victims. Although Killing Eve captures a similar dynamic between a killer and the person who tries to catch them, there are solid differences between the two shows. The thing is that Will Graham started to form a relationship with Hannibal Lecter without knowing that the man was a serial killer. Moreover, Lecter was in a position of power over Will as his psychiatrist, and used it extensively. On the other hand, Eve never doubted Villanelle's predatory nature. She confronted the cold-blooded assassin and refused to allow Villanelle to manipulate her. Unfortunately, Will Graham could never fully reach this point. Of course, we don't know how the fierce confrontation of the two women will end, but I hope the show's finale will be less gruesome than in Hannibal. By the way, the duo of protagonists don't necessarily have to be same-sex. Surprising parallels in Money Heist. Let me remind you. In the Netflix hit show, the police inspector Raquel Morello is tasked with capturing a gang of robbers, headed by the mysterious professor. Eventually, Raquel becomes fascinated by the charming criminal mastermind and starts a relationship with the professor. Although in the beginning, she's not aware of who the man she loves really is. Doesn't it remind you of something? Exactly! The actress behind the character, Itziar Ituño, proved this reference to the Hannibal franchise herself, saying that she took her inspiration from Clarice Starling. As you no doubt remember, the young FBI agent had a tragic experience in her childhood, while Inspector Raquel Morello was formerly abused by her husband, and they both developed sympathies for the extremely intelligent criminals. At first glance, the professor is not very similar to Dr. Hannibal Lecter, as he's an introvert and doesn't want to be in the limelight. But you cannot ignore the influence he has over people around him and his ability to lure them into his adventurous plans. The creator of Money Heist, Alex Pina, considered Raquel's relationship with the professor as very powerful and romantic because initially they come from two opposite sides, but later act as one. And right now, let's talk about a pair of characters whose similarity to Hannibal Lecter and Will Graham is even more evident. Not so surprising parallels with Sherlock. The origin of this comparison is quite clear. In both the series and in the Sherlock Holmes stories, one main character is a criminal and the other one is trying to catch him. And both of them are of an extremely high intellect. Let's compare the villains. Although Dr. Lecter is not a criminal mastermind like Professor Moriarty, they both have their hands in a lot of what's going on. Will Graham and Sherlock Holmes both have extraordinary powers of figuring out why particular events happen. For Sherlock, it's a skill of deduction, and for Will, it's a mysterious and torturous talent. He can literally recreate the murders in his mind. By the way, it turns out that the ferociously popular serial killer actually influenced the BBC show Sherlock. Mark Gatiss revealed that the idea of Sherlock's famous Mind Palace technique originally came from Hannibal. Also, Bryan Fuller's series reportedly influenced the casting decision for Sherlock. As you know, the role of Charles Augustus Magnuson is played by Mads Mikkelsen's brother, Lars. And in fact, Magnuson is the only character, except Sherlock himself, who also uses the Mind Palace technique. But let's get back to our comparison. In Conan Doyle's books, and in the majority of its adaptations, Sherlock Holmes and Professor Moriarty share a strange bond. At its core lies an urge to prove themselves as the best in their fields, Moriarty being the prince of crime and Sherlock the best detective. Little by little, it becomes an obsession for both of them, just like for Will and Dr. Lecter. But for the latter, the mutual obsession turns into something almost intimate, especially as depicted in Fuller's Hannibal. So it's no wonder that in another Sherlock-based series, Elementary, Sherlock and Moriarty were in fact in a close relationship. As in this interpretation of Conan Doyle's character, Moriarty is a woman. And finally, the storyline of Sherlock and Moriarty in the novels ends just like in the Hannibal series. Yet, although Sherlock survived the waterfall, it's unlikely that Will Graham would be that lucky too. However, there are rumors about the possibility of a fourth season of Hannibal. Is there a chance for one more season of Hannibal? Following the finale of the third season, fans have been hoping for the next one, as Bryan Fuller initially had a 7-season plan for his show. However, in 2015, the NBC network abruptly canceled the series because of low ratings. But Fuller never really gave up on Hannibal. A year ago, he wrote on his Twitter that he, the cast of the show, and its producer Martha De Laurentiis just need a network or a streaming service that would want the series to continue. I don't feel there's a clock on it or an expiration date for the idea, we just need someone to bite. And now, as the entire 3 seasons of Hannibal are available on Netflix, the rumors about Season 4 have sparked up again. Moreover, Mads Mikkelsen hinted in his Instagram post that the dark drama might return. Mikkelsen has also said that although he hadn't heard anything specific about new episodes, the show might follow some of the characters from Silence of the Lambs. Do you agree that Hannibal deserves to be renewed for Season 4? Share your thoughts below. And thanks for staying with Awesome Movies!